Coming up on 5 Minute News. Biden orders tough new vaccination rules for federal workers. Rise in COVID tracing alerts reveals scale of UK's Pingdemic. And study finds 3 Americans create enough carbon emissions to kill 1 person. It's Friday, July 30. I'm Anthony Davis. President Joe Biden on Thursday announced sweeping new pandemic requirements aimed at boosting vaccination rates for millions of federal workers and contractors as he lamented the American tragedy of rising yet preventable deaths among the unvaccinated. Federal workers will be required to sign forms attesting they've been vaccinated against the coronavirus, or else comply with new rules on mandatory masking, weekly testing, distancing, and more. The strict new guidelines are aimed at increasing sluggish vaccination rates among the huge number of Americans who draw federal paychecks, and to set an example for private employers around the country. However, pushback is certain to Biden's action. It puts him squarely in the center of a fierce political debate surrounding the government's ability to compel Americans to follow public health guidelines. The federal government directly employs about 4 million people, but Biden's action could affect many more when federal contractors are factored in. Biden, seemingly fed up with persistent vaccine resistance among many Americans, delivered a sharp rebuke to those who have yet to get shots, saying, "They get sick and fill up our hospitals, taking beds away from others who need them." At the same time, he expressed sympathy for people who have received their shots and are frustrated with the consequences of the minority who fail to get vaccinated. And he again emphasized that the fight against the virus is far from over, girding Americans to remain strong in the face of setbacks in the pandemic. His comments came as some 60% of American adults have been fully vaccinated. There remains significant resistance from many Republicans and some unions to vaccine mandates for employers. Almost 690,000 people in England and Wales were told to isolate by the official COVID-19 mobile phone app in the week ending July 21st, illustrating the pressure on key industries as staff shortages brought some supply chains close to breaking point. Contact tracing pings from the National Health Service app were up 11% from 620,000 the week before, though the rate of increase slowed. The number of venue check-ins recorded by the app fell to 6.7 million from 10.4 million. The legal requirement for hospitality and other businesses to display QR check-in codes was removed on July 19, but the dramatic decline in the data also suggests some people are choosing to disable or not use the app after recent surveys showed a rise in deletions. Politicians and scientists in the UK are concerned that people are deleting or at least switching off its tracing function to avoid having to self-isolate. Food and logistics companies have warned of critical shortages of workers in recent weeks, and ministers have allowed limited numbers to avoid the 10-day self-isolation to ensure services can keep running. The government is also planning to exempt anyone who's fully vaccinated from August 16. Car makers on Thursday urged Prime Minister Boris Johnson to make their workers exempt from quarantines as self-isolation rules exacerbated labour shortages that are hampering production. But the pressure on industry could soon ease amid a significant fall in COVID cases that is not yet reflected in the app data for England. After a 2-month surge in infections driven by the highly transmissible Delta variant, the number of people testing positive for coronavirus is now declining. The lifestyles of around 3 average Americans will create enough planet-heating emissions to kill 1 person, and the emissions from a single coal-fired power plant are likely to result in more than 900 deaths, according to the first analysis to calculate the mortal cost of carbon emissions. The new research builds upon what is known as the social cost of carbon, a monetary figure placed upon the damage caused by each tonne of carbon dioxide emissions by assigning an expected death toll from the emissions that cause the climate crisis. The analysis draws upon several public health studies to conclude that for every 4,434 metric tonnes of CO2 pumped into the atmosphere beyond the 2020 rate of emissions, one person globally will die prematurely from the increased temperature. This additional CO2 is equivalent to the current lifetime emissions of 3.5 Americans. Adding a further 4 million metric tonnes above last year's level, produced by the average US coal plant, will cost 904 lives worldwide by the end of the century, the research found. On a grander scale, eliminating planet heating emissions by 2050 would have saved an expected 74 million lives around the world this century. The figures for expected deaths from the release of emissions aren't definitive and may well be a vast underestimate. Air pollution caused by the burning of fossil fuels is also directly killing people, with a landmark Harvard University study published in February finding that more than 8 million globally are dying each year from the health effects of toxic air. You can subscribe to 5 Minute News on YouTube with your preferred podcast app. Ask your smart speaker or enable 5 Minute News as your Amazon Alexa flash briefing skill. Subscribe, rate and review online at 5minute.news. 5 Minute News is an Evergreen Podcast covering politics, inequality, health and climate, delivering independent, unbiased and essential world news daily.